are getting into all things elastic. Why am I yelling? I don't know. So this is a video that has been requested and that I have put off for a long time. Basically because there is so much about elastic and I was scared to miss anything or forget something or just not talk about something and then have people in the comments being like, you didn't say this and that. I had to get over that, and now I am bringing you this video with the caveat that it is probably not inclusive of absolutely everything, because guess what? I'm a human too. So there are things that I'm going to miss. There are things that I don't know. There was something when I was prepping for this episode that somebody mentioned that I had never heard of or done, and it's amazing. So that is exactly why I have this YouTube channel, to learn more for myself and bring that information to you so we can all be better sewists together and have a fulfilling sewing journey. So with that being said, let's get started. Before we get started here, really quick, hit that subscribe button because again, there is a giveaway coming up. Yeah, I don't know. It's been quarantine. I don't know. That's not even an excuse. I'm just like this. Anyway, there's a giveaway coming up. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. Let's get into this one. So a couple of the things that I am definitely not going to talk about today are fold over elastic, because I really don't have experience with it and it's kind of different altogether, I guess. I don't know. I'm not talking about fold over elastic or elastic thread. Shearing is something that I do have plans to do this summer, hopefully in June, but probably not till July. There are some really great videos on YouTube with elastic thread if you are interested. All I really know about it is you want to hand wind the bobbin and don't stretch it, just like wind it normally, like without stretch. Yeah, and you need lots of it. Enough about that, let's get on to elastic. So I am going to talk about clear elastic at the end of this video, so if you are interested in the clear elastic information, then you'll have to stay till the end to get that, because right now we're going to go through the regular uses. And guys, if you want any actual tutorials from me on any of these things, leave me a comment down below letting me know, and I will absolutely do my best to make that for you. Because I know I'm kind of going over this like very briefly, but I wanted to get it all out there, and then if anyone has specific questions they can ask and I can make those videos for you. Now there's a few main types of elastic that we're going to discuss, and the first one, and probably the most common that you will think of, is braided or regular elastic, and that is stuff that you think of when you think of elastic. So it can come in a variety of sizes. I'm not sure the smallest size, maybe 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch and 3/8 is very common. Then it can go like, you can get really wide stuff like 3-inch elastic and probably even beyond, which is great for waistbands. I have some wide stuff here. And then like sizes in between 1 inch is common, things like that. And that's probably what you're gonna use the majority of the time, unless you're doing like specialized things and stuff. That's what I use in my scrunchies. I use it for mostly everything. I mean, that's like a lot here. Another type of elastic is picot elastic or lingerie elastic. So it has little frills on it and it's a little bit, I guess, more comfortable. I don't know how to explain it. It's different. It's different, okay? And it's got the little ruffle on it, and there's different kinds. There is also lingerie elastic that has like a fleecy back to it. So for like bra straps and things like that where you want a lot of comfort, you're gonna wanna try and find a lingerie elastic. And I will definitely link some sources below, of course, if I can find them. So picot elastic or lingerie elastic is what you want to look for when you're sewing undergarments and stuff like that. For the waistband of boxers, you will want, I don't even know what it's called. I'm gonna say like boxer elastic, but I will try and leave a link below where the backside again is soft, but it's wider than your regular picot elastic will be. Okay, another type of elastic that we're going to talk about, just have this little piece, is elastic cord. So this can come in a variety of sizes as well, not as big of a range as regular elastic, but this is great for things like masks. It's also great for things like button loops. So when you do like a closure in the back, a keyhole closure or something like that, and you want to have a button loop, these are really great. I will say though, when you are sewing with elastic cord, you need to sew back and forth over that like 75 times, because it almost always comes out if you don't. So decrease your stitch length and then sew over it like as many times as you can. Okay, another type of elastic, and I don't have any, I've never bought this, I've never used it, but there is something called drawstring elastic, and it is a flat elastic, typically wider, like 2-inch or whatever. I'm gonna use this as an example. So if this was your elastic, it would be soft on one side. Actually, I don't know if that's true, but it's a little bit thicker, and then in the middle, there's a channel that you can run a drawstring through, and this is obviously what you want to use for waistbands. If you want to go that route, you can absolutely just use regular elastic and then sew in a channel. That is all up to you, but there is that option of drawstring elastic. So another type of elastic that might be useful to you, especially if you're sewing kids clothes or actually even maternity stuff, is slotted elastic or buttonhole elastic. And I don't know if you can see this, I'll pop in some close-ups, but it has slots all along the entire length for buttonholes, and cloth diapers use this too. Some brands use this for their cloth diapers. If you're making your own, you could absolutely use this for leg holes and stuff like that. I have them in my kids' clothes. These are ready to wear clothes. Again, I've never used this myself, but it would be very, very simple to do. So it just kind of extends the length of your garments, and it's great because my little guy can fit these now. They're pretty tight and cinched up, but as he grows, I'll be able to undo these elastics, and then it can relax to the full width, and as long as the length stays good on him, he can wear them. So slotted or buttonhole elastic is great for that. So I'm going to start off by talking about some of the basic techniques that you can do with elastic. So you can do things like ruching, which is where you use the elastic to like cinch up an area, usually a vertical area, to make a specific technique. I'll pop some pictures in here of everything I'm talking about so you guys can see it as I discuss it. A pattern that I have used ruching for is the Ellie & Mac Feel Frisky panties. They do a good job of explaining that there, but basically you just stretch the elastic, zigzag over it, or even straight stitch depending on what you're doing, and then it'll cinch up the fabric when it relaxes. This is also really, really common in maternity t-shirts on the sides, you know, because you want a little bit of extra room in the front. So to give that extra room, you need to cinch up the sides to allow that expansion to happen. I'll try and link some videos or patterns and stuff like that down below, different resources for you to try. I will also have resources linked for as much elastic as I can find. It is kind of hard to get a hold of right now, but I will do my best. So that would be ruching, and you're typically going to use like regular braided elastic for that, but just know that all the elastics that I'm talking about today can kind of be interchangeable for the most part. There are a couple instances where you wouldn't want to interchange, but for the most part, don't get too hung up on like having exactly the same elastic that's in the pattern. And a great option is to check the Facebook group that the pattern is made by, the designer's Facebook group, and ask in there like, do I really need 3/8 elastic, or could I get away with 1/4 inch because it's what I have, that kind of thing. So definitely don't be afraid to do that. So again, I'm going to just talk about this as regular elastic, but again, if you wanted to use a rubber or a clear elastic for some of these applications, you absolutely would be able to. So we already talked about ruching, and now I'm going to talk about cinching, which is a little different. So ruching, again, is typically when you are contracting the fabric vertically. Cinching is now when you're contracting the fabric horizontally or widthwise across the body. And cinching can typically be done in a couple different ways, as can ruching. So I'm going to kind of talk about them the same way, although just know that ruching is vertical and cinching is horizontal. So you can either sew along the length of the elastic with a zigzag stitch as you're pulling the elastic across the garment. And again, I'll try and leave some videos below for all of these techniques for you guys. I don't personally have any yet, but there are tons out there, so I will definitely link them below for you guys. So that is what you would do for the zigzag version. Just keep in mind that this is going to show on the outside of your garment, so you'll want to have a matching bobbin thread, absolutely, so that it's not as noticeable. If you want to really minimize the look on the outside, go ahead and make a casing in your garment. A good example of this is the Apple Tree Grow With Me romper. Grow with one of their rompers. The ones with the side drawstrings, it uses a casing type of technique, and it's a free pattern, so for the smallest size, so you could get just the instructions there and then adapt that to your garment, whatever you're making. But essentially you would take a strip of fabric and sew it in wherever you want your to be, and then you would just sew it along the edges of that, leaving a channel on the inside. When we're talking about feeding elastic through a channel, you want to remember the size of your elastic and then give yourself a little bitty extra wiggle room on either side. So I mean, it depends on the size of your elastic, but like 1/8 of an inch is a good number, and that just allows you a little bit of wiggle room to get the elastic in, but also in case your stitches aren't perfectly straight and parallel, then you'll have a little bit of room. So maybe 1/8 of an inch on each side for bigger elastic. Just really depends what you're sewing. So once you have that channel sewn, you can go ahead and feed your elastic into that channel, sewing it on both ends so that it will cinch up where you want it to. Now, feeding elastic through a casing, we're going to get into this right now, but I'm also going to say that this is the same for waistbands or cuffs, really anything where you need to feed elastic through. So I'm not going to really mention those things again later on because I'm going to talk about them now. So there's a few different ways you can do this. You can do this with a safety pin. Just pin your safety pin to one end of your elastic, feed it into your channel. Now, your elastic is going to be smaller than your channel because we want it to stretch out and contract your fabric. So once your elastic is all the way inside the channel and that other end that does not have the safety pin on it comes to that edge of the channel, pin that in place. Use a safety pin. A safety pin would probably work best, but a regular pin will do just fine if you don't have one. Other options other than a safety pin are a loop turner or a bodkin. Those both work to feed elastic through. I personally just use my bodkin. It's kind of my favorite thing, and I've picked mine up at the dollar store. I think it was like 2 for $1.25. And then once your elastic is all the way inside the channel, it won't be out the other side yet. So you just have to keep working it through there with your whatever tool you're using on the other end, pushing the pin and pulling the fabric until it peeks out on the other side. Now, depending on the instructions of your whatever you're making, you will either sew this down now, tack it down with a basting stitch, something like that, or pin it in place. That is very important. You do not want to be losing that elastic in the casing because then you have to redo it all. So now if you were ruching or cinching, you would pretty much be done there. If you are doing this in a waistband or a cuff, then you would be sewing this in the round, and to do that, this can be really tricky. So for wider elastic, it's not as tricky. You can pin this and then put it into your sewing machine perpendicular to the way that your fabric would feed in, so perpendicular to the needle line. That's fine, and I like working with bigger elastic. It's really easy. You can then zigzag stitch it or do a square with an X in the middle, whatever you really want to do here. When you're working with teeny tiny little elastic, like 1/4 inch, I don't have a small enough piece here to show you, but this gets really tricky and it'll get sucked into the needle plate, and there's so many complications. And you wouldn't think it should be this hard, but it is. So what I have found is that I actually like to turn it so that instead, and I'm just gonna demonstrate this on the big piece, but imagine this was a smaller piece. So instead of feeding it through this way, we're going to turn it and feed it through our machine this way. You have more space to sew. So instead of just having a 1/4 inch where you have to go back and forth, you now have the entire length of the elastic to go back and forth. And then you would just close up your casing as the instructions direct, and that would be that. Okay, so another place you might use elastic is for sewing like leg bands or necklines when you're making underwear, swimsuits mainly. And the way that you're going to do that is you sew it to one side of the fabric, typically the wrong side, and then you're going to flip that over and it'll be hidden in the fabric, and then you just top stitch it down. So the pattern directions will typically tell you to sew a loop, quarter your loop, quarter your opening, like your leg hole opening, and then match those up and sew them together. That is absolutely great. You will use the same technique I talked about if you are having trouble sewing your loop together, where you feed it through the opposite way, and then you will attach it. Now, you can use your serger for this. There's a couple things I caution you. Definitely number one is if you're not comfortable with your serger quite yet, don't use the knife, like flip the knife up or down, whichever way yours flips, to disengage it so that you don't cut the elastic, because that will basically compromise the entire elastic. The other thing is when you stretch and sew on a serger with elastic, it doesn't really come back to the shape that you want it to all the time. At least in my experience, I do tend to prefer to sew elastic in on my sewing machine, so that's just what I'm gonna recommend to you. Now, Callie, hi Callie if you're watching, she left this tip about when you're sewing in leg hole elastics specifically, instead of using the quarter marks, you're going to, on the front side of your garment, so basically I would say from like your hip down around like to the crotch, where where your bum starts, down there, you don't stretch that elastic. You just have it nice and flat and don't stretch it at all. And then once you get to the back side where your bum is, that's where you do all the stretching of your elastic and sew it into the leg hole. And she said that helps to keep the garment tight to your bum so it doesn't like bag out or doesn't fit properly or whatever else. So try that, I'm going to, and we'll see how that works. Thank you again, Callie, for that tip. Now, if you are still having trouble with connecting your elastic together, maybe it's just hard to do or it's not working out the way you want it to, one thing that I have tried recently is I don't connect it. So I start sewing at the beginning and I just have one long piece, and I still match up my quarter points and all that, but then when I get to the end, I make sure I overlap that elastic the same amount that it says in the pattern directions, and then I just continue sewing over top. I find that with the little stuff like 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch, it does work better, and it allows me to not have to do that extra step of sewing in the round, and then it's just easier to work with overall. All right, I think this is the last thing I'm going to talk about like regular elastic, which kind of again overlaps with the clear elastic. But another technique you can use elastic for is gathering. So if you really don't like gathering, if you haven't found that it can work for you either with the 2 or 3 basting stitch method or with dental floss, then go ahead and try using elastic. So what you're going to do is cut your elastic to the length that you want the finished piece to be. So I'm gonna, for example, maybe we're talking about a skirt attaching to a bodice for like a gathered skirt dress. So you're going to cut your elastic to the length of the bodice. Now, if you're doing this as all one piece, obviously you need to make sure that it's the entire length. If you're just doing the front separate from the back, then you're just going to do the front and then the back. So you cut your elastic to the width of that bodice, and then you stretch it evenly across your fabric that you want gathered up, zigzag stitch that all along, and it should cinch it right up the way just like regular cinching would do. Then you have nice even gathers, and you can sew that on to your bodice. So another type of elastic is swimmy elastic. You're going to use this kind of the same way you use the braided elastic. It's specifically made for swimming, so it wears better under those conditions. And there's either the rubber types or the clear types, which brings me to clear elastic, and it has a few more uses than your typical elastic, which again, most can be interchanged. But if you look at a ready-to-wear t-shirt, you might see in the shoulder seam some elastic, some clear elastic, and the reason they do that is just to reinforce it a bit and keep it from bagging out, or like, what's the word I'm looking for? Stretching out, I guess. If you look on the tags of those shirts, they likely say 100% cotton, and they obviously don't have elastane in them like our cotton lycra t-shirts that we make are, right? If your fabric does have elastane in it, I think you would probably be okay, but it doesn't hurt to do this, especially if you have like a really poofy or heavy sleeve or something going on there. You would put a little strip of reinforcing elastic in there, and you don't need to stretch it. You just want to make it the same length as the seam, so that if that shoulder does drop, the elastic will help to hold it up. You can do the same thing in a bodice skirt, or a skirt being attached to a bodice. If you're doing, again, like a really gathered skirt, then you would want to add some reinforcement there with some clear elastic or something like that. If you're using a heavy material like bamboo or something like that, you would want that extra support for the bodice so that it doesn't just like pull everything down and get all this. Phew! Okay, I think I have talked myself out of elastic. If you, again, please leave any questions below you have, or if you want to see a specific tutorial on anything. This was kind of just a big overview of elastic and a lot of different uses for it. Again, there is likely much more that I have not mentioned. So if there is something like that too, leave it below and I can look into it and maybe do an updated video of this in the future if that is something I need to do. So thank you again so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I will catch you in next week's video. Bye!